"You're not leadership material." That's how he opened the meeting. No greeting, no build-up, just those 5 words. I was still settling into the chair across from his desk when he said it. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I thought I was perfect, but because I thought I had earned more than that. "My name is Jenna Park. I was 32 at the time, a senior operations analyst at a mid-sized tech company. I wasn't in management, but I was the person who kept things moving. Schedules, systems, logistics. Quietly efficient, dependable. The kind of person who gets thank yous in email footnotes but never headlines the memo." He didn't elaborate much, just gave me a polite managerial smile and went on to mention how valuable I was to the team, how dependable, how precise, how I kept things running behind the scenes. "But," he added, "when it comes to taking charge, rallying people, you don't quite have that presence, that edge." I nodded slowly, hiding the sting behind a practiced calm. Inside, something cracked. This wasn't just a one-off conversation. I had been inching toward a leadership role for months, taking on extra work, mentoring junior colleagues, volunteering to lead small projects. I thought it was obvious that I wanted more responsibility. Apparently, I was wrong. I walked out of his office in a fog. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat at my desk and stared at the screen, replaying his words over and over. Not leadership material. The phrase stuck like a sliver under my skin. But here's the thing. Once the shock wore off, I didn't feel defeated. I felt determined. I started paying closer attention to him, to our meetings, to the way decisions were made and leadership was modeled in our office. And what I saw wasn't exactly inspiring. Our team was struggling. Meetings went off track, projects lacked direction, and no one, not even the people with the titles, seemed to know what they were doing half the time. It became clear to me that leadership in that environment wasn't about skill or strategy. It was about volume. Whoever spoke the loudest, longest, and most often got the floor and the credit. Meanwhile, real work was done quietly in the background by people like me. Still, I said nothing. I waited. I watched. And then one day, during a meeting that started spiraling into the usual mess, I saw the opening. The manager floundered through his agenda. People talked over each other. Nothing was getting done. And something in me shifted. If no one else is going to lead, I will. That was the moment everything changed. Eric wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He wasn't cruel or overtly manipulative. But he was careless in a way that caused quiet damage. He didn't yell, but he dismissed. He didn't micromanage, but he ignored. And what made him dangerous wasn't hostility, it was indifference masked as competence. In every meeting, he looked busy, always scribbling in a notebook or nodding thoughtfully. But when it came time for real decisions, he defaulted to vague language and passed the responsibility sideways. When things went wrong, he'd say, "Well, we all had input," as if that excused everything. He was polite, approachable even, but not present. Not really. He had checked out of leadership long before he told me I wasn't cut out for it. The deeper I got into the system he was running, the more cracks I saw. There were junior employees carrying full workloads without guidance. Documentation gaps that cost us weeks. Deadlines built on assumptions. And Eric, he floated above it all. He wasn't malicious. He just believed showing up was enough. And that's what made me furious. Because when people like him occupy leadership roles, they block the way for those who are actually doing the work. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where your inbox is already on fire before you even get to your second cup of coffee. I had barely settled in when the calendar alert flashed. Cross-functional strategy session, 11 a.m. My stomach tightened. These meetings were notorious. Too many voices, no clear agenda, and a lot of defensiveness dressed up as collaboration. By 11, 15 of us had squeezed into the main conference room. Representatives from marketing, product, tech, and operations. My manager, Eric, stood at the front, laptop open, eyes tired. "All right," he began, scrolling aimlessly through a half-prepared deck. "Let's just talk through where we are and where we want to go. No context, no objectives, just a vague invitation to chaos." Marketing jumped in first, highlighting missed deadlines, slow dev responses, and customer complaints piling up. Product chimed in, deflecting blame. Tech responded defensively, citing vague resource shortages. Eric nodded along, offering empty reassurances and phrases like, "We'll figure it out," and "Let's circle back." I sat quietly, watching the room unravel. I could see Olivia, our intern, struggling to keep up with the back and forth, her pen flying across her notepad. Around the table, people grew agitated, voices rose, and nothing, not a single problem, was getting solved. Eric glanced at his notes, then up at us, then back at his screen. He was lost. And something inside me clicked. I wasn't the boss. I wasn't even on the leadership track according to Eric, but I knew what we needed. I raised my hand halfway, then lowered it and just spoke. "Can we pause for a moment?" The room fell quiet. I continued. "We've circled this conversation before. There are a few core issues that keep resurfacing. Would it help if we tried to name them clearly?" Eric hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." I stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote in bold letters, "Key issues." 1, I said, there's timeline misalignment between product and marketing. 2, tech doesn't have visibility into customer feedback until it's a crisis. 3, operations isn't looped in until after major decisions are made. 4, no one's clear on post-launch ownership. I turned to the room. Does that sound accurate? There was silence, then slow nods. A marketing lead added, "We also don't have shared KPIs. We're measuring success differently." I added that as point 5. What followed wasn't magic, it was structure. I divided the group into 3 pairs to tackle the most urgent blockers. We set a 15-minute timer. I kept the energy moving, asked clarifying questions, gently redirected when needed. By the time we regrouped, we had draft action items, timeline corrections, and assigned owners for each point. I summarized everything on the whiteboard while Olivia typed it up. When the meeting ended, people clapped. Not a standing ovation, just a light, spontaneous applause of relief. Several people thanked me. Olivia stayed back and said, "You should have been the one running these from the start." I smiled, said nothing, and walked back to my desk with the dry erase marker still in my hand. I didn't plan to lead that day, but leadership showed up anyway, because real leadership doesn't wait for permission. It steps in when clarity is needed and action is overdue. After that meeting, something in the air shifted. It was subtle, just a few longer glances in the hallway, a couple more people looping me in before decisions were made. No one said anything directly, and Eric certainly didn't acknowledge it, but I could feel it. I had done something that mattered, and yet I wasn't naive. I knew that taking charge once, even effectively, didn't mean I had arrived. I wasn't suddenly wearing an invisible badge of authority. I was still a senior analyst, still working under a manager who had already written me off as someone who couldn't lead. So I stayed quiet, but not passive. I kept my eyes open, and I kept stepping in. Not loudly, not disruptively, but with intention. I started prepping more thoroughly for our team meetings, even if I wasn't running them. I'd map out risks, draft outlines, and bring data that helped shape better decisions. When projects started to go off course, I offered to host quick syncs or clarify ownership. I wasn't trying to steal credit. I just wanted things to work better, and I knew how to make that happen. It wasn't about making speeches or taking up space. It was about creating clarity, providing structure, asking the right questions, listening when no one else was really listening, and slowly, without ever being given the title, I became the person people came to when they needed direction. One day, a product manager from a different department emailed me directly. "Jenna, I've noticed you're the one who really knows what's going on with rollout timelines. Can you help us coordinate across our teams?" I stared at the email for a second before responding. This wasn't someone doing me a favor. This was someone recognizing value. I agreed, and within a week, we had a new system for weekly coordination in place. Simple, but effective. It saved hours. Meanwhile, Eric remained unchanged. If he noticed the difference, he didn't let on. He still ran our official meetings, still dominated conversations with generic feedback and vague plans. But increasingly, people were circling around him and coming to me for clarity afterward. At first, I wondered if I was overstepping, but then I remembered what he'd said. You don't have that presence? Maybe I didn't in his eyes. But presence isn't just volume or posture, it's about being the one who people trust when things are uncertain. I was becoming that person. It was Olivia, the intern, who pointed it out first. You know, she said over coffee one afternoon, everyone on the team says you're the real manager. They just don't say it in front of Eric. I laughed softly, but something in me straightened. Not out of pride, but resolve. This was never about revenge in the petty sense. I didn't want Eric's job. I didn't want to embarrass him or take over his meetings. What I wanted was to become the kind of leader I needed earlier in my career, quietly effective, deeply aware, and committed to elevating the work and the people doing it. I took on mentoring more junior team members. I helped restructure our project pipeline. When one department was struggling with onboarding, I collaborated with HR to streamline the process. I never asked for credit, I just did the work. And slowly, my reputation shifted. Even without a title, people treated me like a leader. They copied me on decisions. They deferred to my judgment. They trusted my word. The most surprising shift came during a quarterly planning session. The VP of operations was present, someone several levels above me. Eric started off the meeting, but within 10 minutes, it was clear he was underprepared. He fumbled through timelines, didn't have answers to questions, and looked to me with a silent plea. So I stepped in. Not abruptly, not dramatically. I simply filled in the blanks, clarified next steps, referenced key data points. I didn't make Eric look bad, I made the room feel stable. And after the meeting, the VP pulled me aside. That was well handled, she said. You've got a real instinct for this. I thanked her, but inside, I felt something settle. Something undeniable. This wasn't about proving Eric wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. I never called Eric out. I didn't write reports or send dramatic emails. My revenge, if you could call it that, was quieter. I earned influence by being useful. I became the person others came to with real questions. I hosted working sessions, clarified projects, and started sending out recaps with clear next steps, even when I wasn't asked. When I shared information, I seed the right people. I included Eric, always, but I built trust with everyone else. And slowly, the flow of communication shifted. What used to funnel through him now came directly to me. Eric didn't push back. He couldn't, because everything I did made him look like he had things under control. I wasn't undermining him. I was stabilizing what he had left spinning. Eventually, stakeholders from outside departments stopped addressing him in strategy meetings. They looked to me, asked for clarification, deferred when I spoke. The real change happened during budget planning. I walked in with charts, projections, and clear asks. Eric walked in with a folder and half-finished notes. When it was over, our director asked Eric if I could take point on execution. He nodded. That's when I knew I had won. In the weeks after that quarterly meeting, things began to shift in more noticeable ways. I wasn't officially promoted, but the tone of conversations around me changed. The VP who complimented me? She started including me in pre-meeting briefs and asking for my input on team alignment. Others in leadership followed suit, not with grand gestures, but in the quiet way decisions start to get run by you before they're finalized. Eric, meanwhile, was harder to read. He never mentioned that meeting, never brought up the moment I stepped in, but I could sense a quiet discomfort in him, a subtle withdrawal. In some ways, I think he felt threatened. In others, I think he realized something about himself, about what he'd overlooked. What I didn't expect was the private one-on-one he scheduled a few weeks later. We sat across from each other again, same office, same chairs. This time, I was the one who spoke first. I asked how he thought things were going with our team structure. He gave a few standard answers, then paused. I've noticed the team's a lot more organized lately, he said, and I know a lot of that's because of you. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I felt a flicker of surprise. You've stepped up, he added. People listen to you, they follow your lead. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even an admission, but it was close enough to acknowledgement. I nodded, thanked him, and left the room without lingering. And for the first time since he told me I wasn't leadership material, I felt a quiet sense of closure. That meeting was the final confirmation I didn't know I needed. I didn't need a new title or a corner office or even his approval. What I had was something deeper, credibility, earned and witnessed. Influence grounded in results. And most importantly, clarity. I looked back at the version of myself who sat in that chair months earlier. Hurt, stunned, trying to hold back the humiliation. I wanted to tell her, he's wrong about you. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what you do next. Leadership wasn't something I waited to be granted anymore. It was something I claimed by the way I showed up every day. And the more I embraced that, the more others did too. Eventually, an opportunity came up to officially lead a cross-functional task force, something that would have never landed on my desk 6 months earlier. This time, it did. No hesitation, no questions. I accepted. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had already proven it, to myself. Since then, I've noticed how differently I approach challenges. I don't second-guess whether I belong at the table. I take notes, speak clearly, and make space for others to contribute. I check in with quieter voices, I redirect chaos without raising mine. The best part? I've started coaching others who remind me of myself a year ago. Smart, focused, overlooked. When someone asks how to gain leadership experience without a title, I say, start where you are. Lead the messy meeting. Clarify the broken process. Be the one who brings calm. Recognition will come. But your presence, that quiet command built on consistency, will show up first. That's what they follow. That's what I learned. With a task force under my leadership, I redesigned how we operated. We introduced weekly metrics reviews, transparent timelines, and a shared doc where any team member could raise blockers. People were energized. Problems were addressed early. I made sure to mentor, to share credit, to listen. And slowly, our department turned into a model for the rest of the company. HR began inviting me to leadership workshops as a speaker. Our VP asked me to mentor new managers. And when a new role opened, Director of Operational Strategy, I applied. I didn't ask Eric for a recommendation. I didn't need one. I got the role. Now I lead teams across 3 offices. I hire people who've been overlooked. I ask quiet contributors what they need to shine. I notice who's missing from the table and I pull up a chair for them. Because I remember what it felt like to be told I wasn't leadership material. And I remember what it took to prove them wrong, without ever raising my voice. If you had asked me a year ago what leadership looked like, I might have described someone confident, commanding, someone who spoke with authority and held a title to match. I thought leadership had to be declared by others, endorsed, promoted, stamped with approval. But what I've learned is simpler and more powerful. Leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's not about charisma or corner offices or job titles. Leadership is the quiet decision to act when no one else will. It's seeing a mess and choosing to clean it up. It's offering clarity when things are vague, direction when others are uncertain, and calm when the room is tense. For a long time, I waited for someone to tell me I was ready. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I stayed humble and patient, someone would see my potential and pull me forward. Instead, what I got was, "You're not leadership material." And that turned out to be a gift, because it forced me to look inward, to ask what leadership really means, and whether I was willing to embody it, even without permission. What followed wasn't a grand rebellion. It was a series of small, intentional acts. I paid attention. I prepared when others didn't. I brought order where there was none. I made space for others to speak. I built systems, solved problems, and supported the people around me. Slowly, quietly, I led. And the truth is, that's how many leaders begin. Not with a title or a declaration, but with a moment when they decide, enough, I'll take it from here. That's what I did in that meeting. When Eric faltered, when the room fell into chaos, I stood up, not to take over, but to lift up, not to dominate, but to serve. That's what real leadership is. It's not about being seen, it's about seeing and acting consistently. In the end, Eric never formally apologized. He didn't need to. I wasn't seeking vindication from him. The recognition I received from colleagues, from leadership, from myself was enough. Because I know now that leadership is not something granted, it's something proven. To anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, not assertive enough, not experienced enough, not leadership material, I say this: don't wait. You don't need a crown to build something worthy. You just need courage, clarity, and the willingness to lead from wherever you are. Because sometimes the best kind of leadership comes not from those who were chosen, but from those who chose themselves.